Well, podcaster Andrew Klavan recently read one of my comments on his show. I would say normally I see eye to eye with him. I tend to agree with most of the things, but we are clearly at a significant disagreement. Now, I submitted a comment to his talking about the issue of Game of Thrones. I'm going to show you that clip, and then I'll give you my response to his 3 reasons that he gave, which I found to be very pro-pornography industry.
Now, I got another one from Jason about the same subject. The reason to not watch Game of Thrones, which I said I did watch and enjoyed, is not because it might make you view pornography, but because it is pornography. Some of the actresses described the degradation they experienced and felt pressured into doing. It's not the same as when you write violence or sex into a book. That is actually not real, but the exploitation of actresses on Game of Thrones was indeed very real. Now, that's a much more, to me, serious objection, and it sounds righteous, but I'm just simply not that righteous, because when you start to think like that, you actually can't do anything because sin adheres to everything. You can't own an iPhone because of the people who have to, the enslaved people who dig up the materials needed. You know, you're living on land taken from the Indians, so you have to get up and pretend to apologize to make yourself feel good before you can do anything. In fact, when I don't judge other people, when I don't judge other people's sins, because I believe Jesus said, judge not. I don't think he was talking about something complex. I thought he meant don't pass judgment on the sins of other people. You can pass judgment on the crimes because you have to, but you don't have to pass judgment on the sins. When I don't judge other people, I also don't accept their sins as mine. So if the Game of Thrones was filmed with enslaved actresses being forced to take their clothes off, I would say, no, that's a crime, and I cannot participate in that crime. But in fact, because I'm watching women whose ambition trumped their modesty, which is essentially right, they can talk about, listen, you know, they can talk about being exploited, but this is, and it was exploitative, I'm not denying that. No, I don't feel that that is a sin that adheres to me. I feel that that's something that I can watch. Now, whether or not, I did not find the nudity and sex edifying in Game of Thrones. I almost had to get, you know, I used to laugh when I was watching it and say, put your shirt on, sister, I can't hear the dialogue, because it was distracting. But still, I do not believe that level of righteousness, at least for me, it's just not something that I do, because you couldn't move at all. You literally, I could make that argument about almost everything on earth, that it is touched with sin, for the simple reason that everything on earth is touched with sin. I don't believe very, very, very few nude scenes, I've seen maybe 4 or 5 in my life, are necessary. And I believe women, these actresses are exploited, but maybe they should make a stand against that.
So there you have it. Now, he gave at least 3 arguments. I want to break those down, and I want to explain why I think those 3 arguments were very pro-pornography industry. First, he said, well, you know, hey, I'm not that righteous. And then he said, when you start to think like that, you really can't do anything. Now, I would respond to that and say, it is a huge stretch for you to say, somebody who says, I will not watch the sexual exploitation on something like Game of Thrones, means that they also can't own an iPhone because they're not sure of the sourcing of that labor. Clearly, Game of Thrones was exploitative. Simulated rape, simulated incest. In fact, when this show was popular, even the secular media was making comments about how much sex and nudity that they had put into the show. And then you say that you're just not that righteous. Now, one of the things we've got to remember, especially as Christians, and we're thinking biblically, Romans 3 makes it clear that none of us are righteous. Your personal righteousness should not be an excuse for what you do or don't do. Those of us that are Christians, we have one standard of righteousness. That is the righteousness of Christ. Outside of Christ, I have no righteousness of my own. But inside of Christ, 2 Corinthians 5 makes it clear I'm a new creation, and we as Christians have a high calling. The second argument that you gave was that, well, hey, these are not enslaved people. You said if they were forced to do this, then you wouldn't watch. You said, hey, they're getting paid. Well, I would say that the pornography industry should make you their marketing director. In fact, when I heard you give that argument, I was thinking to myself, okay, how many years was Andrew Klavan in Hollywood? I think you may have been in Hollywood a little too long. Hollywood with the casting couch, Hollywood with the Harvey Weinsteins of the world that has been pressuring young women, sometimes before they're even adults, into doing sexually exploitative things. These are just the things we know about. We don't necessarily know what's going on behind the scenes. And then you actually admitted, you said, quote, and it was exploitative. So you actually granted me that you found the content in Game of Thrones to be exploitative. But you said, hey, you didn't think that sin adheres to you. But you are paying for it with your eyeballs. All of us who view and watch this material, we're telling the directors who are asking these actors and actresses to do these debasing, sexually exploitative things, we're telling them that we want them to keep creating this content. You are participating. The reason Game of Thrones was so popular was because of so many Christians like you who made these same excuses, and they watched the content and they told producers that they wanted to see content like this, that they wouldn't take a step back and they wouldn't say, well, it's touched by sin. No, they would call it what it is. It is sin. In the final argument that you gave, you kind of chuckled a little bit. You said the nudity made you laugh, and you said, they were exploited, and you wish that the actresses would stand up for themselves. No, Andrew, I want you to stand up for them. I want you and me and men like us to take a stand and say that we will not participate in the exploitation of women in the world today. You see, the reason that there's demand for things like Game of Thrones or for things like prostitution or OnlyFans, all these things we see in our world today, the reason that there's demand is from the Johns, the people that are watching, the people that are creating that demand. I don't want you and I to take a step back and say, I wish that these women would stand up for themselves. Maybe there's some truth to that, but I want you to stand up for them. And I want every man of integrity to also take that stand. I want to be a part of raising a generation of men who will take the same stand, who will be men of integrity, who won't make excuses for the pornography that fills our screens. And I want to strive to be that man. For a lot of my life, I have not been. But that's what I want to move toward. You see, the exploitation in Hollywood is very real. The only question is whether we will participate. We will vote with our eyeballs, and it seems that you are willing to continue to do and to make excuses for. Well, there you have it. Whose side are you on? Do you agree with Andrew that I'm making way too much of this and something like Game of Thrones is something that Christians should be watching? Or will you join me and say, no, we will take that stand. We will not participate in the exploitation that Hollywood gives us. You see, I see no difference between what the pornography industry produces and what something like Game of Thrones was. Sure, they put a little story in it. Sure, they made it an action and adventure, but they too were creating pornography. Well, let me know in the comments whose side you got here. And this is Jason for Soulfire. I'll catch you in the next one.